From the way how the demonic beasts ran, it was evident that they had sensed something perilous. Some great monster was coming. From the way how the demonic beasts ran, it was evident that they had sensed something perilous. Some great monster was coming. An extremely cold will shrouded the vast space at that moment, and Futian shuddered, feeling a chill running down his spine. The jungle below actually became covered by a layer of frost, being frozen over altogether. However, that was not the end of it. In the very next moment, terrifying scorching will emerged. The chill was turned into heat, and a great swath of the jungle below wilted in a frenzy. The cycle of heat and cold went on over and over. Futian did not hesitate to keep speeding away, leaving that space and returning from whence he came. Li Xian had ulterior motives, and the very reason Futian returned following the tracks he came so far was to get near others from the Dali dynasty. Far away in the sky, a great monster of crimson colors all over it sped. Fauna wilted everywhere it passed. Every breath it took caused a cycle of heat and cold. The place became covered with frost as it exhaled, and scorching heat was all over the place when it inhaled. That monster was hundreds of meters long, and had hard scales all over its body. Its colossal head resembled that of a human, and it had horns. The human-headed dragon-bodied monster was known as Zhuin, also known as the Candle Dragon. The Candle Dragon sped away forward, chasing after Li Xian. There were saints among Li Xian's party, and the direction they traveled in was the one Futian was going in. Despite streaking through the sky at great speeds, he was still unable to shake off their pursuit. The saints were traveling at unimaginable speeds. It was as if their bodies had become one with their surroundings. That Candle Dragon was moving at extreme speeds as well, continuing to close in on Li Xian's party, which naturally meant that it was closing in on Futian as well. Oh! The Candle Dragon exhaled, and its surroundings were frozen over. Freezing will of the great path swept through the sky, and the space seemed to have frozen over. Futian's speed became greatly affected. He was then circled by sword wills, which zipped through his surroundings, cutting down the freezing will as he continued moving forward. Yet his speed had visibly dropped. Faster, brother seventh swordsman. At that moment, Li Xian and his party, who were all riding on divine implements, surpassed Futian. Futian glanced at them with cold eyes, but he did not say anything. The sword will around him grew stronger, and howled in a frenzy, tearing the freezing power around him as he moved. Futian tried changing course, and headed in a direction different from Li Xian. Yet the Candle Dragon still had its eyes on him, so he had no choice but to keep moving forward. The Candle Dragon caught up shortly after. Its eyes closed in a split second. Light was drained from his surroundings, and the place turned as dark as night. With the place turning dark all of a sudden, Futian felt as if he had gone blind, and was unable to see anything. He was only moving forward, guided by his instincts. However, his spiritual powers were greatly restrained, and had succumbed to the darkness as well. He naturally knew that it was an innate talent of the Candle Dragon. The world tree in his life palace swayed, and slivers of aura emanated, shrouding him, allowing him to sense everything around him. His eyes changed, seemingly imbued with divine light, enabling him to see through the darkness. Despite still being affected, he was no longer blind. A strong sense of crisis loomed over him. Cold will shrouded his body, and terrifying pressure was getting close. A huge claw was launched at him. He was like an ant when compared to the humongous body of the Candle Dragon, looking puny and insignificant. Saints were different despite being on the same plane, and the same naturally applied to the demonic beasts as well. That Candle Dragon was also a demon saint on the first level of Saint Plane, but it was more powerful than the ones he had fought before. Swords of Cassiopeia manifested from the sword will around him, and it shot backward, zipping through the sky like bolts of lightning, streaking past the Candle Dragon's claw. It headed straight for its human-like head. The Candle Dragon's condescending eyes took a glance at Futian, and it exhaled again. Frost shot through their surroundings, and the space before it was frozen over. The swords of Cassiopeia that appeared were frozen by the frost, stopping where they were. A huge sword of raging storms coalesced right before Futian. He turned around, and the claw banged onto the sword, sending Yi Futian's body flying away. His body was sent back thousands of meters. He stood in the air. The candle dragon opened its eyes and dispelled the darkness, returning light to their surroundings. I believe we have no enmity, Senior. Aren't you pursuing the wrong person? Yi Futian said. The candle dragon glanced at him, condescending, and continued to move forward. It opened its mouth and exhaled. At that moment, their surroundings were frozen over, and Yi Futian felt as if he was about to turn into a statue of ice. The world tree in his body swayed, and the light of the sun emanated from his body. He became scorching hot throughout his being in that very instant. It was as if suns were hanging on his body, dispelling the cold. A dazzling screen of the sword that tore through space appeared around him. He held onto the sword with both hands and continued to step forward. The space shook as he did, his might resounding throughout his surroundings. It was as if he would combine with the great will and the powers imbued within his sword. Boom! The body that was shrouded in the screen of the sword tore the will of the great path of freezing right away as he charged at the candle dragon. The candle dragon closed its eyes again, turning the surroundings into darkness. Yet, it did not manage to affect Yi Futian's eyes, which were gleaming with divine light. The sword tore through space and grazed the candle dragon's claw as it headed straight for its head. Yet the might of the great path of heat and cold was merely overwhelming. It became difficult for the sword to travel, and the dragon's claw was brought down again. His sword was shattered, and he was sent flying yet again. Blood was seeping out of his mouth as he grunted. He did not continue to retreat this time. He held onto his sword and glared at the candle dragon. Li Xian and his people had been far away from where he was by then. Cold killing intent was seen in Li Xian's eyes. Regardless of how powerful Yi Futian was, he deemed that the only outcome that would have resulted from facing a demon saint candle dragon was death. Going solo? Not even conventional saints at the first level dared not venture out alone in the West Mountain, as it was possible to encounter demon saints. Yi Futian dared to venture deep into the West Mountain alone, due to having formidable combat capacity, which Li Xian deemed to be stupid. If Yi Futian were to die in the candle dragon's hands, it would have had nothing to do with him. Beware! Demonic beasts approaching. A voice was heard, and Li Su, Li Xian's elder brother, frowned. He was a saint and sensed dangerous aura looming. There was powerful demonic aura emanating from far away. Li Xian and his party stopped and sensed powerful demonic aura from several directions before them. They quickly saw a chisel-toothed demon saint at the front, who brought several sage-level demonic beasts with it. But the numbers were fewer than when Yi Futian fought it. The chisel-toothed demon saint's eyes were filled with cold killing intent. Li Xian and the others emanated powerful aura, and they looked in yet another direction, finding an ape-like demonic beast, which was red-hot all over, as if it was clad in the fires of hell. It held a huge staff in its hand. It was none other than the fiend Zhu Yan. There was an extremely ferocious snake demon in yet another direction, which had 9 heads. Other than the several demon saints, there were also many great monsters at sage levels appearing. Li Xian and his party realized right there, and then that demonic beasts were jumping them. Furthermore, it was more than just that of one race. All of them in the party sported glum looks. One golden dragon after another emanated from the body of Li Su, Li Xian's elder brother, which shot up to the sky and let out angry roars. Their surroundings shook, and they seemed to be sending a message far away. Many looked at the sky in the West Mountain. Some of them moved in that direction, and there were some who were attacked. Retreat, Li Su said, and their bodies began to fly backward. Those demonic beasts charged forward at them, intending to kill them. The extremely ferocious and brutal Zhu Yan descended with the fires of hell, and brought the staff down on them, as if intending to crack the earth open. A saint stepped forward with a divine implement in their hands, bursting with golden defensive images. The space seemed to have been shattered with a loud bang. Li Xian and his party continued to retreat, and those demonic beasts charged at them, emanating strong killing intent. However, Li Xian's lineup was indeed powerful. There were 3 saints among them, and all of them were from the Prince Regent's residence. Even so, they continued to retreat, and were mainly defending. The situation before them was tricky. They were waiting for reinforcements before annihilating the threat before them once and for all. Li Xian and the others retreated to where Yi Futian was fighting the candle dragon shortly after. The man and the beast were still fighting at the moment. However, Yi Futian was injured, and yet the sword will continue to circle him. Li Xian frowned, finding it puzzling that the candle dragon had yet to kill the seventh swordsman. As for the Chiseltooth, the nine-headed snake, and the other demon saints, their killing intent shot to their skies when they saw Yi Futian. He had killed their people before, yet he managed to escape. Yi Futian naturally knew about the killing intent of those demonic beasts. In truth, those demonic beasts had been drawn to where he was using the sage demonic beasts that he had enthralled. Li Xian and his people wanted so badly to dump me here and leave, eh? Yi Futian thought. Those demon saints charged at Yi Futian with cold killing intent. But since Li Xian and the others were closer, it looked as if those demonic beasts were charging at them instead. Brother Li Xian, how about we team up? Yi Futian said, and flashed to Li Xian's side. If Li Xian wanted so badly to address the seventh swordsman as brother, then he saw no reason to refuse at the moment. However, Yi Futian's mind was cold, and he was filled with killing intent deep down. He naturally noticed the three saints that were with Li Xian. What is this meaning of this? He wondered. It meant that they had enough powers to deal with the candle dragon, and yet they led the beast to him before leaving on their own. Their intentions were very clear at this point. It was a setup that would have killed him if he were to even be slightly weaker. He would have died otherwise at the hands of the candle dragon. If he were to be killed by the demonic beasts in the West Mountain, then it could all have been attributed to the fact that his insolence and foolishness doomed the seventh swordsman, and it would have had nothing to do with Li Xian. Those demon saints had powerful killing intent towards Yi Futian, and all of them charged at Yi Futian, which made it seem as if they were charging at Li Xian's party. The three saints acted right away to repel the demon saints' attacks. The other demonic beasts headed their way in a frenzy as well. A harrowing battle broke out right there and then. As for that candle dragon, it kept to itself instead of joining the fray, watching Yi Futian with cold eyes instead. At that moment, his huge body moved forward and continued to head for Yi Futian, as if it was determined to have him killed. Yi Futian's brow twitched, and a thought crossed his mind. The candle dragon could have been said to have shifted its attention to him, because Li Xian and the others ran. Yet, at that moment, despite being around Li Xian and his party, that candle dragon demon saint still had its eyes on him. That might not have been an ill omen for him after all. Li Xian saw that Yi Futian continued to get close to him, and he could not help but frown, trying to widen the distance between him and Yi Futian. Li Xian saw that Yi Futian continued to get close to him, and he could not help but frown, trying to widen the distance between him and Yi Futian. However, Yi Futian had been pestering him. Although his speed was not as fast as the cultivators of Saint Plain, he was still quicker than Li Xian. There was no question in catching up with him. The candle dragon seemed to be concerned with something, and did not make its move. Yi Futian said nothing, and did not reveal its secret, but the murderous intent was firm in his heart. The demonic beasts of West Mountain were all prey to the sovereign family, but the wisdom of these prey was not any lesser than that of humans. Moreover, they had the chance to survive by being taken as mounts by the sovereign family. Since there was an opportunity for survival, then indeed, some agreement could be reached. In other words, the candle dragon may have promised to surrender. But this candle dragon perhaps did not know that if he killed this disciple of the imperial advisor of Dali in public, he would not be able to survive either, and would not have the opportunity to become a mount. In other directions, great battles broke out, and several other demonic beasts did not hesitate to turn against Yi Futian. Several people of the Saint Plain of Prince Regent's residence also seemed to become aware of it, as they turned and looked back at what was being played out. These demonic beasts seemed to be aiming toward the seventh swordsman. Did the seventh swordsman offend them somehow? Li Su retreated in an instant without hesitation, and came toward the direction of Li Xian. Seeing that Yi Futian was constantly approaching Li Xian to avoid the attack of the candle dragon, a mighty might of the way suddenly surged from his body, his palms waving, and suddenly, his palm print slammed toward Yi Futian. Get away! This palm print was not meant to kill. He would not kill Yi Futian. He only wanted Yi Futian to leave Li Xian alone. Yi Futian waved his sword and cut off the palm print as he was retreating. He glanced at Li Su with an incredibly cold look. Several cultivators of the Saint Plain were also in retreat. Suddenly Zhao Qi, the nine-headed demonic snake, and Zhu Yan the beast turned their attacks to Yi Futian. And that candle dragon also stared at Yi Futian coldly. Its gigantic body moved forward. In an instant, Yi Futian was facing the attack of the four great demon saints. Indeed, people of Prince Regent's residence secretly exclaimed. Their attacks were aiming at Yi Futian. This guy even could fight the demon saints. And he may have also killed the kin of these demonic beasts, therefore greatly angering them. They almost bore the brunt of their rage for the seventh swordsman. When Li Xian observed this, his eyes were cold. Heaven was watching out for him. Before, he had already discovered that Yi Futian had noticed something. But he did not expect that the candle dragon could not kill Yi Futian. If he was allowed to walk out of the West Mountain hunting ground alive, there would inevitably be some trouble. The best thing was to let him die in the hands of the demonic beasts. Yi Futian saw the four great demonic saints attacking, and the aura of the ancient tree of the world in his life palace flowed madly. Suddenly, his body released radiant glory, and the sword spirit appeared. Many methods of the universe now gathered around him. His body levitated and shot toward the sky above. A brilliant sword veil appeared on his body. The sharp claws of the candle dragon, the long dagger axe of Zhao Qi, the long red stick of Zhu Yan the beast, and the tail of the nine-headed demonic snake came down simultaneously and blasted toward Yi Futian, who attempted to escape from the void. Boom! The shockingly loud sound came out, and the sword veil fell from the void, and the sword qi oscillated in the space. Boom! Another loud sound was heard. The giant sword was pulverized, and the sword veil began to crack. Zhu Yan's long stick brought with it infinite flames. As if a hellfire was roaring, a wave of flame burned through everything, and Yi Futian's body fell from the sky. The tail of the nine-tailed demonic snake also smashed down and slammed him to the ground. Yi Futian felt as if his internal organs were shattered. With a loud bang, his body smashed on the ground and created a deep pit. The people of the Prince Regent's residence watched without intervening. At the same time, some demonic beasts now launched an attack against them. Many demonic beasts rushed toward Li Xian. The demon saint of Prince Regent's residence only wanted to force them into retreat, but there were a few beasts that were extremely crazed and unafraid of death. Therefore, killing them was the only option. Apparently, Yi Futian was controlling those demonic beasts. He could not control the demon saint, but in the battle a few days ago, he managed to gain control of some of the demons around the demon saints. He was going to try to use it to deal with Li Yao, but now he had found other uses for it. Seeing that the demonic beasts of their clan had been slaughtered, suddenly, the few demon saints turned on the people of the Prince Regent's residence. As for Yi Futian, who was smashed on the ground, if he was not dead by now, he ought to be fatally injured. The candle dragon demon saint was still staring at Yi Futian. Yi Futian climbed out of the deep pit and floated in the air, looking cold and indifferent. If it wasn't that his physical body was nearly at the saint level, perhaps this fall alone could have taken 8 lives out of him. However, because he had been baptized by the medicinal bath to strengthen his already powerful body, he had an especially dominant physique, so that he could rise as if nothing had happened. When Li Xian saw this scene, he revealed a strange look. How could he come back from that? The infinite sword will was gathering around his body, and it was turning into swords of Cassiopeia, puffing out dazzling aurora of the sword, pointing toward the candle dragon in the void. The candle dragon exhaled, spat out icy frost, and suddenly, Yi Futian's body seemed to be frozen. The swords of Cassiopeia broke through the sky and disappeared into the void. As Li Xian was watching this battle in the void, preparing to see how Yi Futian would meet his end, he suddenly sensed danger, and then a terrible sword will surged from the void. His face changed. The sword did not go to the candle dragon but was coming toward him. This sudden change of event caught Li Xian unprepared. He wanted to hide, But it was too late. The sword of Casiopea was gone in a flash, pointing now at his throat, even piercing into the skin. Li Xian suddenly felt a prickling coldness all over his body. If I die, he dies too. A voice burrowed into the ears of Li Xian. The candle dragon roared, but its body stopped mysteriously and did not continue its attack. Yi Futian's body flashed and came next to Li Xian. The sword of Casiopea puffed out terrible sword wool that surrounded Li Xian. Yi Futian walked up to him and said coldly, "The same mistake was made twice. How come you don't remember not to repeat them?" "What do you mean?" Li Xian replied coldly, pretending not to understand. "Seventh swordsman, you forgot your place." Li Sun, who was currently fighting with the demon saint, reprimanded in anger. Yi Futian came next to Li Xian. He looked at the candle dragon, saying, "How come this candle dragon demon saint stopped its attack?" "How would I know?" Li Xian's eyes were cold. He felt like a puppet, who was once again controlled by the other party. This kind of humiliation made him want to chop Yi Futian into millions of tiny little pieces. At this time, there was a whistling sound that came from the void, and a group of people was heading this way. There were a few among them whose aura was extremely dominant. Seeing this, the candle dragon demon saint retreated backward, and at the same time, the other 3 demon saints also did the same and started to withdraw. The newcomer was the 8th prince of the Dali dynasty. His eyes swept over the crowd and landed on Yi Futian, saying, "Seventh swordsman, what are you doing?" "Saving my skin," Yi Futian said, but his tone was a bit cold. The 8th prince came just in time. As soon as Yi Futian had captured Li Xian, there he came. Was this really a coincidence, or was it intentional? "Quit joking, let go of Li Xian," the 8th prince said casually. There was authority in his tone. "I beg your forgiveness, your royal highness, but I can't do that," Yi Futian replied. "You forget yourself," the cultivators of the prince regent's residence shouted, and they were walking toward him. Someone said coldly, "Even though you are the disciple of the imperial advisor, your treatment of Prince Regent's residence will not be overlooked and forgiven. But before I got a hold of Li Xian, you guys didn't seem to want to spare me either?" Yi Futian said sarcastically. He was biding his time. The people of the Prince Regent's residence had already sent out a signal. The cultivators of the sovereign family would arrive soon. "Seventh swordsman, enough is enough," the 8th prince continued. Yi Futian looked at him, but did not respond. Suddenly, the atmosphere seemed somewhat oppressive. Yi Futian just disregarded the 8th prince. A while later, someone else arrived. It was Princess Li Xiao. She was stunned by what she saw in front of her, and said to Yi Futian, "Seventh swordsman, what is the meaning of this?" "Seventh swordsman, you are much too arrogant," elders of the sovereign family, who scolded him with an icy cold voice. More and more members of the sovereign family had now arrived, and all of them were angrily reprimanding Yi Futian. Yi Futian ignored all of them, and even closed his eyes. Out of sight, out of mind. Li Sun and Li Yao had also arrived, as well as those from the royal house of Li Yang and Li Yu. In the end, the 3rd prince and Li Zhe arrived with a large number of royal cultivators. "Seventh swordsman, what is going on here?" Li Yao asked. "The people of the Prince Regent's residence wanted me dead," Yi Futian replied. "Seventh swordsman, don't lie," Li Su asked coldly. "When did we try to touch you?" Li Xian also questioned. "Put the sword down first." The eyes of the 3rd prince focused on Yi Futian. Yi Futian glanced at the people who came. Those who needed to come came. Suddenly he laughed, a sarcastic laugh, and he said, "The master was entitled the imperial advisor of Dali, and devoted his life to the Dali dynasty with countless efforts to strengthen Dali, and nurtured countless talents, thus valued by the emperor himself. However, the master was not of the Li clan, and had never expected the descendants of the sovereign family to squash him. The resentment toward him had run so deep." As Yi Futian's voice drifted, the faces of many changed abruptly. This accusation was a serious one. "Seventh swordsman, the imperial advisor is a pillar of our nation, and is valued greatly by the emperor. It has nothing to do with names and clans. Your accusation is pure madness," the 3rd prince said. "Is it?" Yi Futian looked at the 3rd prince and replied. "Then, As the disciple of the imperial advisor of Dali, I was ambushed on the royal hunting ground. An attempt was made on my life. I took Li Xian as security for my life, yet no one asked why, but just accused me of being out of line, arrogant, asking me to let him go. But did none of you really care about what Li Xian had done? Upon hearing what Yi Futian said, Li Sun and Li Yao both frowned. The people of Prince Regent's residence looked grave and gloomy. They didn't expect the seventh swordsman to have made such a deep calculation, and to unleash it only at this moment. Moreover, it brought to light the hidden conflict between the sovereign family and the imperial advisor of Dali. This kind of matter could only be acknowledged silently, but no one dared to say it out loud. Which prince dared to admit it? Seventh swordsman, what exactly did Li Xian do? Asked Li Sun. I was resting in the forest of West Mountain when the cultivators of the Prince Regent's residence came at me and attracted a candle dragon demon saint. They fled and left me there, allowing the candle dragon demon saint to attack me, said Yi Futian. The power of the candle dragon was great. We couldn't deal with it, Li Su said defensively. His only regret was that the stupid candle dragon could not kill the seventh swordsman, allowing him to survive. It was now biting them in the *SS really? Yi Futian said sarcastically. Afterwards, when I faced the demon saint by myself, not only did you all watch and do nothing when it was you who guided the candle dragon to me. However, when I got close to you, why did you all start to attack me? Also, when the candle dragon was about to kill me, why did it stop when I took hold of Li Xian? Yi Futian continued his interrogation. How would we know the thoughts of the demonic beast? Someone from Prince Regent's residence answered coldly. How easy it is for you to deny everything so completely. Yi Futian sneered, saying, Li Xian, do you remember your promise to my senior brother outside of Dali Academy? Many people trembled now in their hearts. At the time, Li Xian had sworn upon his own life as a promise. Li Xian's face looked terrible, and he did not forget what happened last time. Li Xian's face looked terrible, and he did not forget what happened last time. On that day, much like today, after the cultivators of the Saint Plain had made a move, he was taken by the seventh swordsman, who demanded to make an exchange, one life for another. To save his skin, he promised Yin Yuan that he would never touch Yi Futian, guaranteed by his own life. Seventh swordsman, if it was indeed as you said, I will investigate this matter, but let him go first, the third prince said to Yi Futian. Yi Futian sneered. The third prince himself was close to the sovereign family. Li Xian was the grandson of the Prince Regent. Sire, the evidence is undeniable. What else is there to investigate? If it weren't for me taking Li Xian, I would already be dead because of their plot to end me. Now everyone is asking me to let him go. But my senior brothers are not here today. So now the descendants of the sovereign family are bullying me like this? Yi Futian sounded so antagonizing that it made many people frown. This *** was determined not to let the matter rest. If news came out that the descendants of the sovereign family were elbowing out the disciples of the imperial advisor, or even made an attempt on the life of a disciple of the imperial advisor, what would the people of Dali think? Perhaps even Emperor Li himself would not be able to spare them. The people of Prince Regent's residence were genuinely useless. They had several people of the Saint Plain, and in their dealings with the seventh swordsman, they had mishandled it. Worse yet, they had allowed Li Xian to be taken once again. What ironclad evidence? It was just the action of a demonic beast, and you determined that Prince Regent's residence ordered it? Li Sun said coldly. This was something they could never admit. He took a step forward to put more pressure on Yi Futian. Pust! The sword qi pierced into Xian's throat, and a drop of blood dripped down. Li Sun stopped, and the look on his face was beyond ugly. Since Li Xian promised back then he should pay with his life for what he did. Yi Futian replied coldly. Murderous intent flowed upon him. The sword was puffing about, moving bit by bit into Li Xian's throat. Li Xian's throat moved as he swallowed. Both of his eyes stared at Yi Futian. Was he crazy? Did he dare to kill him? Seventh swordsman. Several princes couldn't help but call out. Would you dare? Li Xian's voice sounded hoarse as he spat in a cold voice, seemingly full of bravado. After Li Xian's death, if the people of Prince Regent's residence thought that this matter had nothing to do with them, feel free to let my master and senior brothers investigate. That candle dragon is still at the West Mountain, and all of you are here. I hope no one will touch him to destroy the evidence. If I wrong Prince Regent's residence, I, seventh swordsman, will exchange my life for a life, Yi Futian said. Then the sword will puffed out. The sword was unleashed and directly penetrated Li Xian's throat. Li Xian made a sound from his gut, but it was almost impossible to hear. He opened his mouth, and he stared at Yi Futian, full of fear and despair. He dared to kill him. With both hands trembling, he put them to his throat and felt the sticky bloody gore. Li Xian wanted to make a sound, but he was no longer able to do so. Then his life began to fade, and his body fell from the sky. Everyone was stunned. The space seemed to be solidified, and they all stared at the scene playing out in front of them. The seventh swordsman really killed Li Xian. This mad man. Li Sun rushed out and caught Li Xian's fallen body. Li Xian. Li Sun's eyes were red, and his murderous intent was as high as the sky. Li Xian's hands were trembling. Fear was written all over in his eyes. In Dali Dynasty, the imperial advisor had such great authority that he suppressed even the sovereign family. He, Li Xian, as the descendant of the sovereign family, was reluctant to cultivate inside Dali Academy, but he was coerced, for which he had always felt great shame. They were descendants of the sovereign family from Prince Regent's residence, yet they were indebted to the imperial advisor. His grandfather, the Prince Regent, kept a low profile and refrained from asking affairs of the outside world. But he would rather stir the pot so that his grandfather could stand up and intervene, at the very least, to take back the dignity of the sovereign family. As a member of the sovereign family, in front of the disciples of the imperial advisor, they were actually required to show their respect by bowing. Even more outrageous was that the disciples of the imperial advisor saw this as a matter of course. Even though they would return the salutation to those who were princes, for those royal members outside the main branch of the sovereign family, those disciples were not so considerate. Each and every one of them was extremely prideful. Therefore, he provoked Yi Futian, wanting to cause a feud. The funny thing was that the disciples of the imperial advisor were still so arrogant. Even the one who had just become the disciple of the imperial advisor, the seventh swordsman, dared to kill him. He reached out his hand, trembling and pointing at Yi Futian. In his eyes, besides fear, there was also intense hatred and murderous intent. Until his hand fell lifelessly, his eyes were still staring at Yi Futian, and he died without being at peace. The people of Prince Regent's residence who came to his side had all witnessed the death of Li Xian. Li Sun handed him over to the others, and then with his eyes full of murder, he stared at Yi Futian. His body flashed, and went to Yi Futian with a terrifying might. Yi Futian looked at him indifferently and said, "If I die, then it would not just be a problem with Li Xian." "Li Sun, stop!" the third prince shouted. Li Sun, whose body had rushed out, still managed to land a palm print, though the sword guarded Yi Futian's body well. But the slam still caused him to fly out. He groaned and spat out a mouthful of blood. He did not even resist. His sharp eyes stared at the angry Li Su in front of him, looking indifferent. He killed Li Xian, and it would matter whose disciple he was. If the people of Prince Regent's residence killed him in public, it would be a blatant declaration of war to the imperial advisor. Even if Prince Regent's residence dared to move against him, those princes could not sit by idly and watch that disaster unfold. Initially, this matter had nothing to do with the princes. They could deny what he had said about the sovereign family elbowing out the disciples of the imperial advisor. But if he died here today, then it was as good as an admission that the descendants of the sovereign family used the hunting as a pretext to assassinate the disciple of the imperial advisor, with the implicit involvements of the princes. Then the matter could become very thorny. These princes were smart and astute. Even if they had a disagreement regarding the imperial advisor, they would not dare to do so. Aside from the fact that Emperor Li valued the imperial advisor, And even if the emperor had issues with the imperial advisor, judging from the influence and the position that the imperial advisor currently enjoyed in Dali Imperial City, if the sovereign family were to do this, who else would dare serve Dali dynasty? Enough, the third prince said coldly. Your Highness, 7th swordsman executed Li Xian in public, and this is it? Li Sun and the people of Prince Regent's residence were full of anger. This matter will be turned over to the imperial advisor's residence and the Prince Regent's residence to investigate. The 7th swordsman has guaranteed it with his own life. If it turns out that the 7th swordsman killed Li Xian without justification, the Prince Regent's residence may kill him at that time. Li Xian also piped in. All right, let's go back to the imperial city first, Li Yao also said, but his heart secretly trembled. He thought that the 7th swordsman was indeed daring. He had ended Li Xian's life in front of all the cultivators of the sovereign family of Dali. Although he had a good relationship with Yi Futian, it was only because he was the disciple of the imperial advisor, and he had potential was unparalleled below the Saint Plain. His understanding of the 7th swordsman was not good, but what had just happened allowed him to know what kind of person the 7th swordsman was. His sword was genuinely fearless. Was this the pride of the swordsman? Li Yu's heart beat wildly. When she was in the lower worlds, she saw Yi Futian's arrogance, and now, he was still the same in front of the sovereign family. His Royal Highness, I need to take him to the Prince Regent's residence. Very well. The third prince nodded and looked at Yi Futian. 7th swordsman, since you claimed that Li Xian tried to kill you and you killed him because of it, you will be handed over to Prince Regent's residence. Do you object? What if I object? Yi Futian replied. Everyone looked at Yi Futian speechless. He had spared no effort to let his feelings be known. The third prince looked at him casually and said nothing. He was not suitable to handle the matter. Turning this headache over to Prince Regent's residence and imperial advisor's residence to deal with was the best course of action. Although he was close to the sovereign family, the imperial advisor was the imperial advisor, after all. Back to the imperial city, the third prince said. With everything that had happened, naturally, the hunt in the West Mountain had ended. The cultivators of Prince Regent's residence came next to Yi Futian. After the convergence with the cultivators of the sovereign family, their group was even stronger, and several cultivators of the Saint Plain looked at Yi Futian with icy stares and took him away. Li Sun. Li Yao came over and said to Li Su, take the 7th swordsman back to the Prince Regent's residence for investigation. Before everything is cleared, don't act rashly, or you can imagine the consequences. In fact, no one was that idiotic. Whether this was done by the people of Prince Regent's residence or not, everyone should know. It was just that Li Xian's public execution by the 7th swordsman would not easily be let go by the Prince Regent's residence. I know. Li Sun's face was dark, and he did not address the third prince by his title. Apparently, he was highly displeased. Back in the days, his grandfather, the Prince Regent, wielded incredible power, and even though he no longer involved himself with most affairs, he was still well respected in the sovereign family. Now, Li Xian had been killed by an outsider. The prince did not stand up for his own. Li Yao looked at Yi Futian, and heard Yi Futian say laughingly, Your Highness can rest easy. I already said that if the Prince Regent's residence had nothing to do with it, I would pay with my life. There were just too many holes in this matter, and too many clues. Not at all like Emperor Xia's realm, where there was no place to start. It would be easy for the imperial advisor's residence to check it out. He didn't care. He dared to kill Li Xian, because he was sure that Prince Regent's residence would not dare to move him, as the matter was indeed their doing. After leaving the West Mountain, everyone returned to Dali Imperial City. Yi Futian was taken directly to Prince Regent's residence. The news of this incident quickly spread, causing a great sensation with a negative impact. The Prince Regent's residence now fought with the disciple of the imperial advisor, and the 7th swordsman was the first person below Saint Plain who enjoyed great fame in Dali Imperial City. It was unexpected that during the hunt by the sovereign family in the West Mountain, such a thing could have happened, and the 7th swordsman had killed Li Xian in front of everyone. It was unlikely that the Prince Regent would let the matter slide. The Dali Academy quickly received the news and came instantly. Many people were still in shock. At this time, in Dali Academy, Yin Yuan was sitting there, and Li Yao had come to tell him everything that had happened. Yin Yuan appeared very calm, and when he heard what Li Yao had to say, he nodded and said, "Sorry to trouble you, Your Highness. It's all right. It's just that the seventh swordsman. I will go to Prince Regent's residence to pick him up," Yin Yuan said. He then got up and said, "Nanzhai, Chunyang, you two come with me." Yes. Mr. Nanzhai and Mu Chunyang both nodded lightly, and then the three levitated and traveled through the air. The people of Dali Academy looked up at the figures that had just by air, and their hearts were slightly shaken. Had the big senior brother just gone to the Prince Regent's residence? At the Prince Regent's residence, under a giant golden pagoda, Yi Futian was now imprisoned beneath it. At the Prince Regent's residence, under a giant golden pagoda, Yi Futian was now imprisoned beneath it. On top of the pagoda, the might of the Wei continuously blasted down on his body. He sat on the ground, blood streaming down from the corner of his mouth, and rolls of brilliant light screen flowed down from the top of the pagoda, making it hard for him to sit up straight. The sword wool on his body continued flowing, and his eyes were still sharp. He kept his eyes forward indifferently. Many cultivators of Prince Regent's residence were standing there. The person in the forefront was a majestic-looking middle-aged man clad in a golden robe with embroidery of pythons. A strong sense of murder was in his eyes, and he stared at Yi Futian coldly. The son of the Prince Regent Li Jing was also the father of Li Xian. The person that Yi Futian had killed was his youngest son. Although Li Xian was useless, his talent and cultivation was far beneath that of Li Su, but he was still his child. Moreover, the thinking of Li Xian, in a sense, was also his thinking, and he influenced it. But no one would have thought that Li Xian would lose his life because of it. The seventh swordsman, the first man below the Saint Plain, who had found fame recently, executed Li Xian, the grandson of the Prince Regent, in the face of the descendants of the sovereign family. His hand stretched out, and a terrible might of Wei suddenly fell on the pagoda. Li Jin waved his hand, and a dull sound was heard. Yi Futian felt that the authority of heaven had fallen on him, and his body almost fell to the floor. He spat out another mouthful of blood. The corner of his mouth lifted in a sneer, and he looked up at Li Jing coldly. The reason why he decided to kill Li Xian was not just because Li Xian wanted him dead, nor did he kill Li Xian in the heat of the moment. There were two other reasons. One was to create discord between Li Yao and the others, and the second was the imperial advisor's residence. Since there was already disharmony between the sovereign family and the imperial advisor, he did not mind increasing that disharmony. One day, it would be better if Emperor Li sidelined the imperial advisor, although doing so may cause some damage to the imperial advisor's residence. But what he did not want was that one day to be the enemy of the people of the imperial advisor's residence. Judging from the status held by the imperial advisor's residence in Dali dynasty, even if the whole scheme was revealed in the future, and Dali realized his real identity, it would not be possible for Emperor Li to harm the imperial advisor. After all, the imperial advisor's residence was also deceived by him without foreknowledge, and at most, it would add to the disharmony. You are not asking for mercy? Li Jing stared at Yi Futian, and his hand extended again. Another roaring sound, and the pagoda span as radiant rays of light fell. Yi Futian spat out another mouthful of blood again. Although Li Jing would not kill Yi Futian himself, since this swordsman was so cocky, he would crush his backbone. He would like to see how he would continue with his swordsmanship when the sword of the swordsman was bent. You must know the truth of this matter. If I died or was maimed while in custody at the Prince Regent's residence, what do you think the imperial advisor's residence would do? Prince Regent's residence killed the disciple of the imperial advisor. How would His Majesty deal with it? Yi Futian asked Li Jing. Then you killed the grandson of the Prince Regent. What should be done to you? Your son was incompetent. In trying to kill me, he was killed by me instead. You should think about whether or not you taught your children anything. Yi Futian continued. And the people of Prince Regent's residence stared at Yi Futian. This swordsman was beyond presumptuous. Yin Yuan, a disciple of the imperial advisor, come to pay a visit. At this time a voice was heard. Although not loud, it resounded throughout the entire residence. Everyone could hear it clearly. That was fast. The people of Prince Regent's residence exclaimed in secret. They had not been back for long before Yin Yuan's arrival. They had not spoken. And yet a vast might of the divine will permeated toward them, shrouding heaven and earth, and in an instant, it descended where Li Jing was. Apparently, Yin Yuan projected his will to inspect the situation inside Prince Regent's residence, looking for Yi Futian. Was this a visit? Using spiritual will to scan Prince Regent's residence was considered rude behavior, but Yin Yuan did it anyway. Not only did he do so, but a vast might of the divine blasting toward them. No one had yet responded to whether or not to allow Yin Yuan to enter the residence before three figures came from the void, arriving in this space in an instant. The three people who arrived were Yin Yuan, Nanzhai, and Mu Chunyang. After they arrived, they took a look at Yi Futian, who was imprisoned underneath the pagoda. Their look was somewhat cold. Li Jing and the others turned around, coldness in their gaze, staring at the three who had arrived. Li Su stepped forward and looking at Yin Yuan he said coldly, "The great teacher trespassed in Prince Regent's residence. Isn't it a little rude?" Yin Yuan looked at Li Su and asked, "Were you at West Mountain when it happened?" Li Su frowned and said, "Yes." Yin Yuan raised his hand. In an instant, a suffocating might was born between heaven and earth. Under the pressure of this might, everyone seemed to stop breathing. Then they saw Yin Yuan reached out and made a grabbing gesture in the air at Li Su. Before anyone could react to this unremarkable movement, an immense handprint appeared and locked down the space around Li Su, who realized that he could no longer move. His level of cultivation was at the first realm of Saint Plane, the realm of proving holiness. Yin Yuan, whose own cultivation was at the third realm of Saint Plane, unblemished saint, was thought by many of the Dali imperial city as possibly the strongest cultivator of this realm. This meant that apart from a few holiness of nirvana of Dali imperial city, Yin Yuan was standing at the peak. At this moment, Li Su truly experienced the might of the great path was. The palm pressed down in the air and lifted him. It was so fast that it was like a flash of a thought before Li Su was taken. Yin Yuan. Li Jing stepped forward, and the same atmosphere of unblemished saint erupted. Suddenly, there was a terrible field around him, and Yin Yuan likewise made it hard for everyone around to breathe. However, Mr. Nanzhai and Mu Chunyang walked a few steps forward on each side without being affected. Mu Chunyang himself was also an unblemished saint, and Mr. Nanzhai was at the peak realm of saint of true self. "Did you take part in leading the candle dragon demon saint to my younger brother?" Yin Yuan's voice was calm. Li Su struggled madly, but could not break free. He was already at Saint Plane, the uppermost level of cultivation, and yet at this moment, he was humiliated. "It was just a coincidence. I heard that you all stood by and watched while my brother fought the demon saint, and when he got too close to you, you all fought him. Was that also a coincidence?" Yin Yuan asked again. Li Su was green in the face and did not respond. "I also heard that you are launching an investigation?" Yin Yuan said. "Whether the candle dragon has anything to do with you or not, just this alone is enough to prove that you set my brother up. What else do you need to investigate?" At this time people were coming from the void. They were all extremely powerful figures from Prince Regent's residence. Several cultivators of Li Jing's generation were already saints of true self, and another one was an unblemished saint. The makeup of the group was terrifying. "Yin Yuan, you have gone too far," someone said. "Little brother, how many times did the pagoda suppress you?" Yin Yuan looked at Yi Futian under the pagoda. 27, Yi Futian responded. Yin Yuan raised his hand, and suddenly a giant palm print fell down. It turned into overlapping shadows, exactly 27, that directly blasted on Li Su's body. Pooh! Li Su spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body fell from the void, causing the ground to crack, and many more bones and tendons were broken. Last time, outside of Dali Academy, When my younger brother had a run-in with Li Xian swore on his life. Since he is now dead, I believe that this was a matter entirely of Li Xian's doing. The others were involved in the heat of the moment, and had nothing to do with Prince Regent's residence, so that I won't be pursuing the others regarding this matter. Yan Yuan stepped forward and walked in Yi Futian's direction. He said, "I am taking him away." Li Jing saw Yan Yuan coming forward, and he stepped forward also, with a force that shot through the sky. His whole person was like an angry dragon, filled with dominant majesty. The two men walked toward each other, and the momentum was so powerful that it caused a great gust of wind in the surrounding world. A dull sound was heard in the void. It sounded as if it could explode at any moment. The pressure of the might was shocking. As the two men approached each other, the momentum grew stronger, and everyone watched quietly. They all knew that the two were suppressing their own force. Otherwise, if they were really to unleash their power in the battle, the entire Prince Regent's residence would be razed to the ground. Finally, when the two came together, they extended their palms and slammed toward each other. The palm prints of the two landed together, and the pressure of the mighty washed over the space with the forces of mountains and oceans. All the cultivators from Prince Regent's residence stepped out and stood in different directions. The terrible waves landed on them, making their clothing flutter wildly. The force forced them to slide back. Cracks appeared on the ground and extended into the distance. The ground underneath their feet burst open and collapsed. Yan Yuan continued to move forward, and a radiant light exploded from his palm, as if to shatter everything in front of him. Bang! Li Jing's body flew out backward, and his feet tried to break on the ground, creating deep track marks. "Do you really want to take him away by force?" Li Jing looked up at Yan Yuan. He was indeed the chief disciple of the imperial advisor of Dali. "Your Highness invited our younger brother to go to the West Mountain to hunt, and we all agreed to let him go without accompaniment. Naturally, it was a demonstration of our absolute trust in the sovereign family. However, what happened at the West Mountain was no longer a matter of etiquette. Someone crossed the line. I already said that I believe it was the doing of Li Xian alone, and I would let the matter rest here." Yan Yuan looked at Li Jing and continued, "I didn't report it to the master. Instead, I have come here myself to bring back my brother. If Prince Regent's residence wanted to stop me from taking him today, maybe won't come next time. If the matter is escalated, are you sure you can afford to pay the price?" Li Jing looked horrible. He knew that the whole thing flopped because Yi Futian was not killed, so it was all exposed. He also knew that Yan Yuan was right. If the whole thing was escalated, and the imperial advisor locked horns with the Prince Regent, and caused Emperor Li to get involved, who would look good? If the Prince Regent's residence wanted to pick a fight with the disciples of the imperial advisor, what would the people of Dali dynasty think? What would His Majesty think? "Let him be taken away." A majestic and authoritative voice came, and suddenly, everyone trembled. Looking in the direction where the voice came from, Li Jing clenched his fists. Li Xian, his poor child, had died in vain. Yan Yuan looked up in the direction of the voice, and said clearly, "Yan Yuan thanks the Prince Regent." Yan Yuan looked up in the direction of the voice, and said clearly, "Yan Yuan thanks the Prince Regent." Afterward, he stepped forward and walked straight past Li Jing. Li Jing did not stop him. The Prince Regent himself had spoken, so the others would not stop them. Furthermore, unless the Prince Regent came out personally, other people in the residence perhaps would not be able to stop Yan Yuan. Dong! Yan Yuan threw out his palm, and the pagoda made a crystal-clear sound. Immediately following, a divine implement was shattered, and the pressure on Yi Futian disappeared instantly. He looked at Yan Yuan and called out, "Brother." Yan Yuan nodded gently and said, "Let's go." Yi Futian hastened his steps and followed Yin Yan, who had turned to walk away. Mr. Nanzhai and Mu Chunyang cast a glance at the rest of the people, and Mu Chunyang said, "If anyone disagrees with Imperial Advisor's residence, please be open and upfront. The disciples of Imperial Advisor's residence respect the Prince Regent, so I hope that the people of the residence will not shame the name of the Prince Regent." Having said that, The four stepped directly into the void and left. It seemed as if Dali Imperial City was a place that they could come and go at will. Everyone at Prince Regent's residence looked at the sight of Yin Yuan and the others leaving, and they were feeling quite revolted. Some of the elders of the palace, who were of the Saint Plain, had experienced the prosperous days when the Prince Regent's residence was in charge of the kingdom. However, the people of Dali dynasty had long forgotten its glorious past. They only knew of the imperial advisor of the Dali dynasty, who was just beneath one person, but above all the rest. As to the disciples of the imperial advisor, who dared to be so forthright, that after having killed the grandson of the Prince Regent, they dared to defy others' opinions and forcibly take in the one who murdered Li Xian. This was why many of the sovereign family had objections toward the imperial advisor of Dali. The imperial advisor had already wielded power that surpassed the power of the sovereign family. But for this, the Prince Regent had never expressed any opinions. In the past few years, he had not bothered with the matters of the kingdom. Many people had said that the Prince Regent was ready to retire and focus on cultivating in peace. At this time, Li Su had gotten up from the ground. The corner of his mouth was still bloody. Even as a cultivator of Saint Plain, he could not hold back his emotions at this moment. Great hatred filled his heart. His brother Li Xian was killed, and now they trespassed and wounded him, destroyed a divine implement, and took away the seventh swordsman. This was what Yin Yuan had done this day. Li Jing did not say anything, but turned around and walked away. After a while, Li Jing appeared in another courtyard. It was very quiet. An old man sat quietly on the ground, his back facing Li Jing, his eyes closed in meditation. There was not the slightest sense of majesty from his person, not at all like the Prince Regent, whose power was once toppling the kingdom. Father, he called. Li Xian, who was slain, was his son, and Li Su, who was wounded, was also his son. The Prince Regent was still sitting with his back facing him, and there was not a trace of disturbance about him. He said, "Losing is losing. If you lost, you must admit it." Li Su and Li Xian did not complete their mission and left evidence behind. That's why they have to pay the price. In the eyes of the Prince Regent, there was neither right nor wrong, only success or failure. Li Su and Li Xian wanted to kill the disciple of the imperial advisor. But not only did they not succeed, but they were also killed by the target and left evidence behind. This was undoubtedly a failure. Both the Prince Regent's residence and the imperial advisor's residence were in service to Emperor Li. The struggle was like a game. The two sides that played had to abide by the rules of the game and not cross the boundaries. Li Xian did cross that boundary, so he could only die in vain. Otherwise, the dispute between the imperial advisor and the Prince Regent, vying for power in the face of the emperor, that would also be a disgrace to the Prince Regent's residence. Yin Yuan dared to be so aggressive and arrogant as to come to the Prince Regent's residence to take away the prisoner, precisely because he had reason on his side, with all the advantages, so he was not afraid of contention. Li Jing understood this, but the one who died was his son, so it was natural that he was angry. Father has stopped inquiring about the matters of the dynasty for many years. Now when this matter comes out, how will the world view Prince Regent's residence? Li Jing asked. Even he could not understand his father's mind. What does the view of the world has anything to do with the Prince Regent's residence? The voice of the old man was still calm. It was as if he had experienced a lifetime's worth of trials. Li Jing, you must remember that Prince Regent's residence, or the imperial advisor's residence, both serve His Majesty. That is all. What is the status of my position, and what is the status of the imperial advisor? Today, the imperial advisor is more useful to His Majesty. Whoever disregards the rules is disregarding His Majesty. Do you understand? Hearing this voice, Li Jing's heart trembled, and he looked at his father. The old man in front of him seemed to see things more clearly than anyone else. So over the years, he had stopped inquiring about matters of the outside world, and no longer fought for anything. Many people thought that he had chosen to cultivate in solitude instead, but in fact, he had already seen through everything. Whether it was the Prince Regent or the imperial advisor, They were all for the sake of the emperor, nothing more. Remember, some things cannot be obtained simply because you fight for it. The kids thought they were sharper than me. Do you think I need them to remind me of anything? The Prince Regent continued to speak. His extreme coolness was nearly frightening to behold. Even though his grandson had died, it did not seem to upset him much. One day, when His Majesty thinks that I am useful again, I will be present again, the Prince Regent continued. Do you understand? Li Jing sighed in his heart. It was very cruel but very realistic. Go back. Seeing that there was no response from Li Jing, the Prince Regent dismissed him lightly. Li Jing turned to leave. After he left, the Prince Regent opened his eyes, and they were extremely sharp. When he got into a match with someone on the level of the Imperial Advisor, it was not a simple matter of who suppressed whom, but whoever made the wrong move first. What Li Xian did was making the wrong move, and it was beyond stupid. Therefore, death was his destination. Yan Yuan and the others traveled in the air after they left Prince Regent's residence. Mr. Nanjai asked Yi Futian, "How is your injury?" "I'm fine," Yi Futian responded. All this was still owing to his strong physique that was comparable to that of the saints. If it were not so, he was probably already disabled. That's good to hear, Mr. Nanjai nodded. Senior brother, I killed Li Xian. Will it involve the Imperial Advisor's residence? Yi Futian asked. Don't worry. Whether you killed Li Xian or not, there is no impact on the Imperial Advisor's residence, Yin Yuan replied. Yi Futian looked up at Yin Yuan and was somewhat puzzled. The world said that the Prince Regent no longer concerned himself with matters of the state and thought that he resides in solitude. But this once powerful prince was far more clever than the world imagined. Li Xian had overstepped the boundaries. His death was unimportant. Yin Yuan continued. He thought that he could change things. But what went on between our master and the Prince Regent was not something the younger generation could resolve. He lacked self-awareness. Yi Futian seemed somewhat befuddled but still nodded. Yin Yuan turned his eyes toward him. Li Xian thought that he could fight for something. But younger brother, you must remember, the best fight in this world is just to cultivate. Yi Futian looked at Yin Yuan, and for a moment, it seemed that time and space had turned back to many years ago. His third brother once told him that whatever was the biggest in the world could claim the truth. If there was anything bigger than the truth, then it had to be a fist. In the world of the cultivators, the best fight was cultivation. These two conclusions had the same meaning. Therefore, the disciples of the Imperial Advisor's residence seemed to have no contention with the world and were cultivating in peace. They did not deign to jump up and down and all around like Li Xian. This was probably a difference in realms. The news that Yin Yuan had taken Yi Futian from Prince Regent's residence quickly spread out, causing huge waves instantly. Many people of the Dali Imperial City felt that they were indeed the chief disciples of the Imperial Advisor, and had trespassed in the Prince Regent's residence to take away their person. Below the Nirvana Saint Plain, could there be a second? Yin Yuan and the group returned to Dali Academy. Although the people of Dali Academy were excited, they were not too shocked. Since the senior brother himself had gone, then they would naturally bring back their person. The Dali Academy belonged to those who were friendly toward the Imperial Advisor. As for Yin Yuan, who managed Dali Academy, all of them worshipped him from the bottom of their hearts. Seventh Swordsman. Li Yao called when he saw Yi Futian returning safely. Gratitude for all the troubles your highness went through on account of me. Yi Futian bowed slightly. Li Yao waved his hand. Your safe return was the most important thing. It was too impulsive of you to have killed Li Xian. Li Xian, after all, was a royal descendant. If the people of Prince Regent's residence were mad enough to kill Yi Futian first, then it would have been too late to do anything. Your Highness, if I did not subdue Li Xian, I would be a dead man already. Since it was destined that one man must die, then this was the only way it could be. Yi Futian responded. Li Yao said nothing more. He added, since you have returned safely, I shall be leaving. Once finished, he bowed to Yin Yuan and the others. Senior brother, I am leaving now. His Highness returned safely, Yin Yuan said. Brother, you have suffered some injuries, rest early. Yin Yuan said to Yi Futian. Yes, senior brother. Yi Futian nodded and turned to leave. I am leaving too, said Lu Chuan, who was next to him. He left with Yi Futian. He walked next to Yi Futian. What you did was a little too risky. With the master and senior brothers around, what do I need to be afraid of? Yi Futian laughed. You are not the least bit humble. Lu Chuan smiled and said. But you weren't wrong. No matter what you did, the brothers will always be there for you. What if I did something wrong? Yi Futian said. As long as it is not a great mistake that betrays the master, then it is the same, just like the day when the master promised to accept you as a disciple. Yi Futian was silent, thoughtful in his heart. Do you know anything about the fourth senior brother? Lu Chuan suddenly asked. What of the fourth brother? Yi Futian asked. He had always been curious about Wang Zhong. He and the other disciples of the imperial advisor seemed out of place. The master has the ability to make death warriors. The father of the fourth brother was a death warrior, and he died many years ago. The fourth brother always hated the master, but the master still accepted him as a disciple and passed on his martial arts to him. Slowly Lu Chuan said, the master is like this. He doesn't even care. Maybe one day, when the fourth brother turns on him, he will still be indifferent. Of course, if there is such a day, I, along with our other brothers, will definitely do things for the master that he does not want to do. Yi Futian was a little surprised. He didn't expect Wang Zhong to have such a story. He glanced at the Lu Chuan, who was next to him, and said, I believe that the fourth brother will not do this. Lu Chuan looked ahead calmly and said softly, Master took each person as a disciple for a reason. I don't want brothers to stand opposite of each other one day either. Lu Chuan looked ahead calmly and said softly, Master took each person as a disciple for a reason. I don't want brothers to stand opposite of each other one day either. Yi Futian thought for a while and said, Master doesn't seem to like violence, but why does he cultivate death warriors? As Master has said before, there is a price for everything you want to do. Whether there is master or not, death warriors always exist, serving the army or born and raised for such purpose. What master does is to make them stronger. There are even some death warriors in the army who knew they were not able to make any progress in cultivation in their lifetimes, and rather chose to receive master's transformation. Lu Chuan continued, but, even so, master admits it is against the law of heaven, and announces he will only cultivate them when there is war, like the Battle of Empty Realm, or when the sovereign family ordered so. Do you know why King Tiandao has a deep grudge with master? Why? Asked Yi Futian. King Tiandao rules the army of the West, which is the strongest army outside the imperial city. He wants to build an army of death gods and hopes master can help. He even thinks that the master can transform not only sages but also saints. King Tiandao has tried to counsel the emperor many times to give master pressure, but master rejected. So to speak, when Dihao defeated Dong Chen, he requested to become the imperial advisor's disciple. Was this the reason? Asked Yi Futian. Dihao's thing suddenly came to his mind, although at that time, after the imperial advisor asked both of them why they sought the way, imperial advisor chose Yi instead of him. Maybe, Lu Chuan said. Then can master transform Saint Plain cultivators? Yi Futian asked, looking at Lu Chuan. Saint Plain cultivators have taken the crucial step and refined their physiques. They have infinite potential. Whether yes or no, master will not do it, Lu Chuan replied. So the answer is no. I see. Yi Futian nodded. After they chatted a while, Yi Futian went to cultivate alone. Although his physique was powerful, he was seriously injured by the divine implement's will, and he needed time to recover. The incident soon subsided, and no direct conflict had happened between Regent King and Imperial Advisor. Otherwise, that would be a crisis. Year 10,022 of the Divine Prefecture calendar was approaching its end. The finely decorated imperial city of Dali was even busier than usual. The tradition of celebrating the end of a year had lasted for more than 10,000 years since the start of the Divine Prefecture calendar. Similar customs were widespread throughout all realms of the Divine Prefecture. though some realms didn't think it as important as other realms did. However, if conditions allowed, having at least a simple gathering was a must for everybody. On the last day of the year, gorgeous lamps lit up the palace of the Dali dynasty. Graceful dancers danced to festive songs. Members of the royal clan and courtiers all gathered in the palace to celebrate the new year. However, the imperial advisor didn't come, and nobody would blame his absence because nobody dared to. All royal clan members knew the imperial advisor didn't like being surrounded by many people. At the end of every year, he would wake up his sleeping daughter and celebrate the new year with her. Emperor Li had asked the imperial advisor about his daughter's issue, but the imperial advisor declined his help. The imperial advisor claimed his daughter's illness was incurable. Even Ren Huang couldn't do anything about it. Nobody doubted what the imperial advisor said. If there had been a solution, how could the imperial advisor have wasted his own daughter's time? Everyone also wondered, what kind of illness did the imperial advisor's daughter have? In the imperial advisor's residence, it was cozy and peaceful. The imperial advisor just had a dinner gathering with his disciples. People returned home. The imperial advisor stayed with Fei Shui in the courtyard. Both of them sat on the ground in a relaxed manner and looked up at the stars above. When fireworks exploded, glittering stars seemed to dim, but nobody knew if Fei Shui could see them. "Master, did you want to see me?" Yi Futian came and asked. "Come sit by me." The Dali imperial advisor laughed and said. Yi Futian nodded and sat next to the imperial advisor. A slight smile rose on Fei Shui's face. It was the second time Yi Futian saw her awake. He felt a tinge of pity and sadness for her. "I heard you went to West Mountain alone a few days ago, and you challenged Demon Saint?" the imperial advisor asked. "It was very hard. When confronting the Demon Saint, I could only survive. My level still restricts my ability," Yi Futian replied. "The gap between saint and sage is indeed hard to measure. Now, you can battle with Demon Saint, and even survive before the Candle Dragon Demon Saint. It is very rare. Perhaps you are the only one in the 100 years history of Dali dynasty," said the imperial advisor. "But I am still just a sage, and I am still unable to enter the saint plane. Cultivation is an accumulative process. It needs time to grow. To enter the saint plane, you need a chance that conforms to the great path, and there is no need to hurry." The imperial advisor continued. "I haven't taught you anything since you became my disciple. Today, I will teach you one chapter of my cultivation method." "Master, I have cultivation methods of my own, and your way of cultivation may not suit me," said Yi Futian, who didn't immediately accept with delight. He would have been inwardly thrilled when he had just reached Dali and learned the best teachings about cultivation from the Dali imperial advisor. However, the imperial advisor's teaching made him feel shame. "If it doesn't suit you, I will not teach you," imperial advisor said, laughing. "My cultivation method is called the Deed of Thorough Comprehension, which contains all aspects of the world. There are several chapters, including the energy of metaphysical practices, which can help you perceive the existence of all beings, observe the change of stars, and foretell one's fortune. But there is only one chapter that I will teach you, and it suits you best. Through it, you can use your body as a cauldron, your soul as a guide, the 5 elements of the great path, as the air to produce the power of heaven and earth, and connect you to the great law of the universe and sharpen your sense to the world. When you fight, your body as the cauldron will flame and borrow energy from the law of the world. If I am not wrong, this chapter will suit you very well." In awe, Yi Futian looked toward the imperial advisor. It was said that the imperial advisor was extremely knowledgeable and proficient in many skills. There was even hearsay about his uncanny abilities. Yi Futian, as a cultivator of such level of course, didn't believe the rumors and assumed his ability was somehow overpraised. But now it seemed, imperial advisor indeed had special cultivation skills. The Deed of Thorough Comprehension should be extraordinary. And the imperial advisor claimed he could see one's fortune from the change of stars. Did it mean he could tell Yi Futian's fortune? "Did Master take me as your disciple because of not only my belief in swordsmanship, but also my fortune?" said Yi Futian. The strength of one's fortune doesn't mean anything. It's not about it, the imperial advisor said. Yi Futian nodded. Even though the mysterious method could measure one's fortune, very likely, it was a rough estimation and could not see one's destiny. Even very powerful astrologers were not able to do so. They could only make a rough guess. I will teach you the cultivation method, the imperial advisor said. Yi Futian nodded, and soon he felt a strong spiritual power that covered his body. Beams of light emitted from the middle of the imperial advisor's eyebrows and shot toward the center of Yi Futian's brow. Suddenly, a lot of things came to Yi Futian's mind. The path was only taught to the chosen one. The law didn't come to unwanted ears. Imperial advisor thought Yi Futian was the one, so he taught him in person. Yi Futian closed his eyes and perceived some moments. The next time he opened his eyes, the imperial advisor was gone. Fei Shui was still there facing him. If she could have seen, her eyes must have been more beautiful. Where is master? Asked Yi Futian. He has gone to rest, said Fei Shui. How long did I meditate? Said Yi Futian. Half an hour, Fei Shui replied. Yi Futian nodded slightly and looked toward where the imperial advisor had been. He was going to make more inquiries. My father told me to pass on the message. When you hesitate, just follow your heart and do what you feel in your heart to be right. Otherwise, the imperfection in your state of mind will affect your cultivation, Fei Shui said to Yi Futian. Yi Futian's heart sank for a moment. He looked at Fei Shui and said, grinning, Master has noticed? Have you seen any disciple evade learning from their master? Fei Shui put a smile on her face and said, and don't forget, I can sense the fluctuation of your emotions. Yi Futian shrugged. He seemed not to mind it. Maybe, he was indeed full of himself. Nothing in the world could be flawless. Even though the imperial advisor might not know his identity, or didn't expect that he came from Emperor Xia's realm, how could he be unaware of anything when Yi just cultivated beside him? Human beings couldn't be empty of emotions, and emotional transitions were detectable. If the imperial advisor had known he came to the greatly to kill Li Yao, would he have told Yi to follow his heart, and do what his heart would not regret? So you mean I have no secrets in front of you? Asked Yi Futian laughing. Yes, Fei Shui laughed and replied. Since I have no secret from you, shouldn't you share some of your secrets with me? Said Yi Futian. Why does the thing in your body make you keep sleeping to survive? You want to help me? Said Fei Shui. She was surprised by Yi Futian's feeling that she sensed. She chuckled at the idea in his mind. Even her father, Ren Huang, could do nothing about it. And this guy wanted to help her? Even though there is no solution someday, maybe we will find it, Yi Futian said seriously. Fei Shui could sense his warm-heartedness, which was from the bottom of his heart. She was never wrong about people's feelings. That was the true emotion from the heart. He couldn't fake it. As I told you last time, the thing in my body is inauspicious. In fact, the inauspicious thing is a treasure that has merged into my body. And because of it, my perception is more accurate and sharper than anyone else's. I can perceive not only human emotions, but also the existence of everything in the universe and absorb energy from them. However, the energy is too much, and once it explodes, my plane cannot support my body to endure this energy, and I will perish. That's why my father lets me sleep to avoid it, Fei Shui confessed to Yi Futian. She then laughed and said, Now you also know my secret. Last time Yi Futian guessed it right. This thing could make the world tree shake, which had never happened before. Even the imperial advisor and Ren Huang had no solution for the thing in Fei Shui's body, so one could imagine how valuable it was. Even the imperial advisor and Ren Huang had no solution for the thing in Fei Shui's body, so one could imagine how valuable it was. Is it be possible to take it out? Asked Yi Futian. It has merged into my body and connected to my veins and heart. My father said it could only be taken out if I die. Fei Shui shared her secret calmly. In fact, she had slept for many years, and the actual duration of her life was very short. If not for her father, she might not have cared about life or death. Perhaps now, she lived her life only for her father. Thus, she didn't care about the secret, especially when she perceived Yi Futian's good intentions. She didn't need to hide it. "Can I perceive it?" said Yi Futian. "Yes." Fei Shui nodded, wondering how Yi Futian would do so. Soon, Fei Shui felt him holding her hand. Her arms slightly shivered, and she intrinsically wanted to retreat, but she didn't do it, and just let Yi Futian hold it. An invisible life force infused into her body under his palm. There was a moment Fei Shui had a mysterious feeling. It was as if she was very intimate with him. But how could he do this? She was surprised. Meanwhile, Yi Futian was amazed by that kind of feeling too. The world tree in his life palace waved and rustled, emitting wisps of life force out of the palace, which ran through his body, tentatively entering Fei Shui's body. It was as if his world tree spirit could do more than detect the thing in Fei Shui's body. Tens of thousands of wisps of life force were infused into Fei Shui's body continuously. It was as if they would never end. A dreamy aura surrounded Fei Shui's body. She slightly felt the treasure that had been part of her blood, and her heart seemed to be detached. It was almost ready to emerge. There was even a life flow that ran from her body to Yi Futian's. The change was unexpected by neither of them. Was Yi Futian absorbing the energy from the treasure? But how? Fei Shui was in shock. The treasure had long been merged into her body, and even her father was not able to take it out. But Yi Futian seemed to have made it. In the meantime, Yi Futian's perception of the world was changing. He could hear Fei Shui's heartbeat, sense her anxiety, and was aware of her confusion and shock. Yi Futian even saw the thing in Fei Shui's body. It was a monument without limit, bearing an inscription with no end. It was hard to see it clearly, but the law of heaven and earth seemed to hide inside. But the thing was a part of Fei Shui's body. It was hard to tell what was what, and if there had not been the world tree spirit, you would have never perceived its existence. Yi Futian opened his eyes and withdrew his life flow. He looked at Fei Shui. Fei Shui's head was lowered. Although she could not see, she was able to sense all that had happened. It was amazing that the treasure in her body could respond to Yi Futian. "So we have similar secrets," said Yi Futian, grinning. Fei Shui laughed too. She nodded and said, "I will keep your secret. I will not tell anyone, even my father." Yi Futian stared at this young lady's simple smiling face and sighed to himself. Then he looked up into the countless stars in the sky. The imperial advisor had a grudge with Wang Zhong, but he still took him as a disciple. The imperial advisor didn't know Yi Futian's identity and knew he might have his own agenda, but still took him as his disciple and taught him the deed of thorough comprehension. On many occasions, the meaning of life was not all about benefiting oneself. Perhaps this sounded stupid. However, this might be what the temperament of a saint meant. "Fei Shui, is there a matrix where you sleep?" asked Yi Futian. "Yes, there is a ceiling matrix," Fei Shui said, confused. "I can take you to the place you sleep." "Let's go," said Yi Futian, standing up. Fei Shui felt his emotions and knew he was not going to send her to sleep, but she still accompanied him to walk toward the place. Soon they came to the place where Fei Shui slept. It was a site full of matrices. Before them stood a cold jade bed. Fei Shui walked up and sat on it. Yi Futian followed her and said, "Maybe I can try to take the thing from your body." Fei Shui said that the imperial advisor had told her the treasure had been part of her blood and heart, and unless she died, it was impossible to take it out. However, after Yi Futian's first attempt, he felt he could have a try again. Fei Shui was silent for a second and then asked with a laugh, "Are you serious?" "Yes," Yi Futian nodded. "You can do it," Fei Shui said, smiling. If Yi Futian wanted to try, she would let him try. Even though she didn't have high expectations. They crossed their legs and sat in the matrix. Both of them closed their eyes. Wisps of life force were released from Yi Futian's body. He held Fei Shui's hands. She lowered her head but didn't stop him. Soon the mysterious feeling reappeared. The next moment, bursts of dazzling light erupted. Fei Shui seemed to have perceived something. She softly said, "What a beautiful tree." Later, her body was submerged by the giant tree. Countless branches and leaves enveloped her. The world tree spirit clasped her to its bosom. Fei Shui suddenly understood why she sensed the impurity of the seventh sword spirit. Actually, he was not a swordsman in training. His natal spirit was not even soared. Their bodies were wrapped tightly like in a cocoon. The world tree rustled and reflected resplendent luster. After a long while, a breath of horror burgeoned from here, followed by a string of clanging sound. The glare of the world tree suddenly vanished. Yi Futian withdrew his natal spirit and looked at Fei Shui, from whom a beam of bright light shot into the sky. Fei Shui, the imperial advisor called. Yi Futian swiftly left the bed and walked away. In a hurry, imperial advisor took a glance at him and walked straight to Fei Shui. Yi Futian directly returned to his residence. He would not go away, but he had no idea how to face the imperial advisor, either. As the imperial advisor had told him, he just did what his heart felt was right. Yi Futian closed his eyes. In his life palace, the world tree rustled in the wind. He wondered what the natal spirit actually was. A radiant beam of light came out of a corner in the imperial advisor's residence and penetrated the sky. People came outside and gathered, wondering what had happened. Yen Yuan, Sir Nanjai, and others came to the gate of the place where Fei Shui slept and requested to see Master. None of them knew what happened. Nothing serious. I am checking Fei Shui's status. You can all leave, said the imperial advisor. Yes, sir. Yin Yuan nodded and said. They saw nothing wrong, and soon all returned. In Imperial Xia's palace, Emperor Xia's realm, Xia Qingyuan summoned Black Wind Condor, after she had just returned from a royal banquet to her own princess residence. Sir Condor felt embarrassed to death. Was he her slave? What are you doing now? Xia Qingyuan asked Black Wind Condor. Black Wind Condor knew she was not talking to him, so he sent a message to Yi Futian. Soon after, Black Wind Condor closed his eyes and reopened them. He looked kind of different. I am cultivating, said Condor. Today is the last day of the year. You should be in the Imperial Advisor residence, right? How does it feel to celebrate the new year in the Imperial Advisor residence? Asked Xia Qingyuan. Yi Futian sensed from her tone that she was not very happy, so he said, Not bad. The Imperial Advisor just taught me his cultivation method. Xia Qingyuan was stunned for a second and said, staring at the Black Wind Condor. So the Imperial Advisor really appreciates you. No wonder you don't want to come back. The Imperial Advisor residence treats me very well indeed, Yi Futian said and sighed. Don't tell me you are thinking about it, said Xia Qingyuan, staring at the Black Wind Condor. Did this be starred really have some emotional connection with the Imperial Advisor residence? Black Wind Condor looked at Xia Qingyuan and didn't answer. Later he asked, What's the matter this time? Xia Qingyuan stared at him and said coldly, Nothing. If so, I should go now, Yi Futian said. You. Xia Qingyuan clenched her fists and hoped she could punch him. About that thing, I found a clue, said Xia Qingyuan. She referred to the last time's incident with Xiaosheng. Black Wind Condor narrowed his eyes and said, Tell me more. We are still investigating. I will tell you if we have results. Fine. Black Wind Condor nodded and replied. Thank you for your efforts these days, Your Highness. Xia Qingyuan looked into Black Wind Condor's eyes and felt somehow relieved. On the last day of the year, she skipped slapping the condor. It was the first day of year 10,023 of the Divine Prefecture calendar. In the Imperial Advisor residence, Dali Imperial City, Yen Yuan, Sir Nanjai, Mu Chunyang, and others came to visit the Imperial Advisor. When they set foot in the courtyard, they saw a slim figure quietly standing beside the Imperial Advisor. Of course it was Fei Shui. Fei Shui. Yen Yuan and others showed surprise. She was not sleeping? What had happened yesterday? Fei Shui's thing had been settled. From today, Fei Shui will no longer need to extend her life by sleep, said Imperial Advisor with a heartfelt smile. From now on, his daughter Fei Shui would be normal except for her blindness. Yesterday, he just couldn't believe it when he saw this. He even had no idea what Yi Futian had done. He didn't ask, and Fei Shui didn't tell him either. Yen Yuan and others first paused a second, and then every one of them smiled. Did it mean Fei Shui would no longer need to sleep? Although they didn't know what had happened yesterday, since Master said it was settled, it should have been settled. Where is the seventh swordsman? asked the imperial advisor. Master, Yi Futian called from a distance. He came closer, bowed, and said, The seventh swordsman is here to greet master and brothers. Good. Have you cultivated on the deed of thorough comprehension? The imperial advisor asked as if nothing had happened yesterday evening. Yes, but it is a little abstruse for me, and I am afraid I need some time, replied Yi Futian. The deed of thorough comprehension is indeed not easy to understand. You have to focus on it, said the imperial advisor. Yi Futian nodded. Yi Futian's eyes turned to Fei Shui. He noticed Fei Shui was also looking at him. Yi Futian's eyes turned to Fei Shui. He noticed Fei Shui was also looking at him. I haven't told my father anything yet, Fei Shui whispered to Yi Futian. Yi Futian could tell there was something playful about her tone. She must be in a good mood since she finally could live a normal life as others did. From now on, she could always keep her father company, and no longer needed to sleep. Yi Futian chuckled to himself. Fei Shui didn't tell her father anything, and the imperial advisor didn't ask. It was as if nothing had happened yesterday. Even those elder brothers had no idea what happened. However, the imperial advisor must have felt something even if he was not told. At least, he knew the seventh sword was not merely a swordsman in training. Even so, the imperial advisor didn't ask. Thank you, Yi Futian replied in a whisper. Can your eyes be healed? I should be the one to thank you, said Fei Shui. My eyes were damaged by the treasure's energy when it came into my body. I am blind, and it can't be cured. But I am already happy to live a normal life. I shouldn't expect much. As a cultivator, even though she couldn't see, she could still perceive the world. Although it was colorless, her life would not be much affected. She was delighted. The only pity was that she couldn't use her eyes to see the seventh swordman's face. Yi Futian didn't say anything, but he felt pity too. Have you taken out the treasure? Asked Yi Futian. No, replied Fei Shui. But it will no longer be part of my body, and can exist separately. My father has sealed it. Although it is not completely sealed, it will no longer merge into my veins and heart, and make me unable to endure it. She continued. In my current status, I can depend on its energy to cultivate bit by bit, and as my cultivation makes progress, I can gradually release the sealed energy and grow up with it. Such an outcome was of course the best for her. The treasure had been utterly connected to Fei Shui's veins and heart in the past, so sealing it would have meant sealing her life and putting her to sleep. After Yi Futian removed it from Fei Shui's body with the power of World Tree, it became independent. Yi Futian could even take it away as his own, since the treasure was more attractive to the World Tree than to Fei Shui's body, which was the reason why it was taken out. But this invaluable treasure belonged to Fei Shui. Yi Futian didn't take it, but left right after he did his job, letting the imperial advisor finish the job. Apparently, after the thing was removed, the imperial advisor did a nice job. Good things come one after another, said Sir Nanjai with a laugh. Master finally cured Fei Shui, and would no longer worry about her situation every day. And the junior brother, the seventh swordsman, even got the opportunity to learn about Master's deed of thorough comprehension, which was Master's core cultivation method, and contained mysterious knowledge that could change the nature's fortune. Sir Nanjai cultivated on one chapter as well, but so far, he had not totally comprehended it. The first day of the new year is indeed a lucky one, Yin Yuan said, smiling. Apparently, everyone was happy for Master and Fei Shui. Lu Chuan took a glance at Yi Futian, and thought something might have happened yesterday. However, it didn't matter. The imperial advisor had a smile on his face. He hadn't been so happy for a long time. Although his power had spread across the Dali dynasty, imperial advisor was actually quite disengaged with politics. For him, power was nothing but fleeting clouds. Today is the first day of the new year, and the court of Dali dynasty will begin today. Seven swordmans, why don't you come with me? The imperial advisor said to Yi Futian. Since Yi Futian had become the imperial advisor's direct disciple, he had gained his status in the Dali dynasty, and was supposed to go to see Emperor Li. Yes, master, Yi Futian nodded. Let's go then, the imperial advisor said. He smiled and turned to Fei Shui. You stay at home and rest. Okay, Fei Shui said, nodding. The imperial advisor gently stroked her head with love, and then steered his sword toward the direction of Dali Imperial City with his disciples. Besides the imperial advisor, in Emperorly Avenue district, masters were coming out of residences and steering their swords in the air in the same direction. On the first day of every new year, all the officials in Dali dynasty came to pay homage to the court. On this day, in the lavish Dali Imperial Palace, a broad path stretched from the sky. All cultivators steered their swords in the air toward the palace following the path. Numerous, rarely seen, big figures all attended this ceremony. The imperial advisor and disciples arrived a little late, and many people were already in the palace. They got off of their swords, and immediately many people outside the palace bowed toward imperial advisor and greeted, "Hail, imperial advisor." The imperial advisor slightly nodded and led Yen Yuan and others to walk forward. The people walking ahead of them all stopped and stepped aside to let the imperial advisor go first to show respect. In addition to the imperial advisor, his disciples caught many people's eyes as well. Yen Yuan was the imperial advisor's chief disciple. In Dali, his name weighed a lot. Not long ago, he broke into the Prince Regent's residence with 2 junior brothers without the imperial advisor's involvement. How daring! As the figure who had stirred up a storm not long before, Yi Futian was the most famed among young elites, and also captured some attention. He hunted in the West Mountain and decapitated Li Xian. How contemptuous! His interest in victory was as keen as his sword. They walked straight to the palace. It was the second time Yi Futian came to the Dali Imperial Palace, but compared with the last time that Li Yao met with Yi Futian and others in a relaxed manner, today the atmosphere was obviously more solemn and tense. That day's meeting was a trial among young elites. This time's ceremony was for all to pay homage to the Dali court. Giant golden dragon patterns engraved on the ground displayed their sharp fangs and claws. The most prominent figures of Dali dynasty stood on both sides of the central path. Behind them were rows of pillars, each carved with one golden holy dragon. In front of them was a lofty staircase that led to a magnificent palace sitting above the clouds. Many royal clan members had also appeared on both sides of the path. They looked in the direction of imperial advisor, with coldness in their eyes. The thing that happened last time let them witness the power of the imperial advisor's residence. After killing the Prince Regent's offspring, Yen Yuan beat Li Su and led his people to leave, and even raved that he would not punish others' wrongs. How brazen they were! Thus, most royal clan members were piqued by them. Even so, when the middle-aged figure walked past them, without a slight essence of life force, nobody dared to look into his eyes. They all lowered their heads. Not to mention the imperial advisor. How many people present today were comparable with the disciple Yen Yuan, who stood behind the imperial advisor? Imperial advisor. People in the crowd greeted and bowed to him. Many people looked toward the Prince Regent, who was standing in the front line. The people of Prince Regent's residence stood behind Prince Regent, including Li Su. Having just noticed the imperial advisor's arrival, the Prince Regent turned around to look at him. He smiled, showing no trace of a grudge. He made a fist salute slowly and greeted, "Imperial advisor." Imperial advisor paused and replied to him with a fist salute, "Your Highness." And then they stood shoulder to shoulder in the front of the crowd. Yen Yuan and others didn't follow behind. Instead, they stood in the crowd at a distance from the imperial advisor. At the front, a prince appeared from the side and showed courtesy to the Prince Regent and the imperial advisor. Li Yao was also present. He looked at the crowd and slightly nodded to Yi Futian when he saw him. Yi Futian nodded to him as a reply. At the same time, another group of people arrived. One of the 2 persons who led the group was the third prince. The other person had a rather imposing physical appearance and domineering manner. He took a glance at the crowd, and many people didn't even dare to face him. They lowered their heads. He strode directly over to the Prince Regent, made a fist salute, and greeted, "Uncle." Prince Regent gave a smile and asked, "How did you have time to come here from the land of West this time?" The person was King Tingdao among the four kings. I have some important issues to report to His Majesty, said Tiandao with a laugh. Then his eyes turned to other people, and fixed on the imperial advisor. He said, the imperial advisor is here too. Imperial advisor nodded as a reply. King Tiandao stood next to them in the front line. Soon King White arrived too. One advisor and 4 kings of Dali dynasty had all arrived, except King Li. King Li was busy with issues in the lower worlds, so he usually didn't show up. Suddenly, the crowd quieted down and stood back to watch a figure appear on the staircase. He stood there, almighty like a god, as if in this solemn palace he was the only one. All hail your majesty, everyone said and bowed. The person standing on the staircase was undoubtedly the absolute master of Dali dynasty, Emperor Li. Feel free to stand up, said Emperor Li. After 1 year, I am glad to see the graceful bearings of you all. Imperial advisor governs the court. King Tiandao guards the border. Prince Regent and King White are also in charge. No wonder our Dali dynasty can prosper, said a courtier smiling. Thank you for all your efforts, Imperial advisor, Prince Regent King Tiandao and King White, Emperor Li said. The Imperial advisor and 3 kings bowed and showed their gratitude. Imperial advisor, I heard recently you took one disciple with exceptional talent, who even defeated King Tiandao's foster son Di Hao. Did he come with you? Emperor Li asked, looking toward the Imperial advisor. Imperial advisor nodded, turned to the crowd behind him and called, 7th Swordsman. Yi Futian walked up and bowed to Emperor Li saying, 7th Swordsman is here to greet your majesty. Raise your head, said Emperor Li. Yi Futian looked up. His temperament is indeed extraordinary, Emperor Li said with a laugh, nodding. Previously Imperial advisor lost his disciple Yuan Jin on the battlefield. I feel so happy you have a new disciple now. Although she has a boyish nature, my daughter Li Xiao is at the age for marriage too. Imperial advisor, what do you think if I married her to 7th Swordsman? Many people were in shock at what Emperor Li had said. The 7th Swordsman had just offended Prince Regent and killed Li Xian. Now the emperor was going to betroth his daughter to him. This was Emperor Li's action indicated that he thought highly of the imperial advisor. Emperor Li's action indicated that he thought highly of the imperial advisor. Of course, there was no doubt that His Majesty betrothed the princess to the 7th Swordsman, because he was indeed an excellent man. He was the best swordsman in the lower worlds. He defeated Di Hao and survived in the hands of Demon Saint. He killed Li Xian in public. He had outstanding talent, courage and charisma, and he was also handsome and the right age. Many people thought from this perspective, and secretly admired this abrupt, but wise decision of betrothal. Princess had a noble lineage, but the 7th Swordsman as the imperial advisor's disciple was extraordinary too. In Dali dynasty, perhaps no one was more suitable than him. Many royal clan members raised their head, shocked at the words, but who dared to question Emperor Li? Yi Futian was also stunned in the crowd. He would never have expected that the first day he came to court with imperial advisor and met Emperor Li would betroth Princess Li Xiao to him. This was ridiculous. He let Yi Futian marry Li Xiao and become the emperor's son-in-law? Not to mention whether he was willing to marry or not. The reason he came to Emperor Li's realm was, and if he married Li Xiao, numerous pairs of eyes fell upon the imperial advisor. The imperial advisor took one step forward and bowed to Emperor Li saying, "It is the 7th Swordsman's honor to obtain your majesty's grace. I took the 7th Swordsman as my disciple, and I am aware that although he has an exceptional talent, his personality was unruly and disdainful. I am afraid he may bring offense to Princess. How about we ask about his thoughts? Otherwise, if Princess has discontent in the future, it will totally be my guilt." The imperial advisor's words make sense, Emperor Li said, nodding. He turned to Yi Futian and said, "The 7th Swordsman, are you willing to marry?" Yi Futian lowered his head and stepped forward. He had no choice. Who dared to refuse the marriage Emperor Li arranged for him? It was Emperor Li's blessing, and he was supposed to bow and express gratitude for it. Any inappropriate reply might bring trouble. But of course, according to what Yi Futian knew, Even if he declines it, Emperor Li would not be angry at him, as the imperial advisor's disciple. Your Majesty, I deeply appreciate your blessing. I have met Princess once. Her beauty and wit are indeed unparalleled, and I am afraid I don't deserve someone like her. Besides, I am already emotionally attached to someone in the imperial advisor's residence. I don't dare to disgrace Her Highness, Futian slowly said. One that didn't know the truth would assume he was sincerely afraid he didn't deserve Princess. However, many royal clan members had participated in the recent hunt, and still remembered how he bluntly treated Princess, and asked her if she could bear his sword. And now he claimed that her beauty and wit were unparalleled, and he didn't deserve her. Wow. Life was nothing but a play, but even though they all knew it, no one dared to expose it. Otherwise, the imperial advisor would be offended. Also, everyone had to rethink the intention behind the emperor's betrothal. Who dared to spread rumors in such a situation might pay for their senselessness at the price of death. Obviously, Emperor Li did so because he thought highly of the imperial advisor. Besides, who was the someone in the imperial advisor's residence he was emotionally attached to? It was evident to everyone he referred to the imperial advisor's daughter. The seventh swordsman had only been in the imperial advisor's residence for a few days, and now he wanted to become the imperial advisor's son-in-law? However, what else could Yi Futian say? He was sorry for Fei Shui, but at least, Emperor Li couldn't say anything about this reason. Both the imperial advisor and Yin Yuan took a look at him after he finished speaking. They knew he used Fei Shui as an excuse. Emperor Li took a glance at Yi Futian and said with a careless smile, "Okay, imperial advisor, if in the future these two young people have this thought, I can arrange marriage for them." The matter of Li Xiao had come to an end. Emperor Li valued the imperial advisor, and since the seventh swordsman was emotionally attached to imperial advisor's daughter, he would not step in and bring embarrassment to the imperial advisor. And instead, he promised to arrange the marriage for them, which showed his magnanimity. Others would just let it be since Emperor Li himself no longer mentioned it. Everyone knew how politically stupid it was to give pressure to the imperial advisor's residence by such a thing. Nobody would do it. I am so thankful for your kindness, Your Majesty. I never ask about affairs between young people, but if one day the thing is decided, I will report to Your Majesty, said the imperial advisor, bowing. He knew what Yi Futian said was untrue, but he had to admit it had effectively solved the crisis, since Yi Futian didn't want to say yes. Good, Emperor Li said, nodding. He then turned to others and asked, "Is there anything to report today?" "Your Majesty, I have one issue to report," said King Tiandao, who stood in the front line. "What is your matter, my brother king?" asked Emperor Li. King Tiandao was Emperor Li's full brother, and was conferred the title of King Tiandao, so Emperor Li called him Brother King. The way he addressed him indicated how intimate they were. It seemed that the Emperor Li equally respected imperial advisor and King Tiandao. The martial power of Dali dynasty has reached an unprecedented level. Numerous top figures came out of imperial advisor's Dali National Academy and My Daily Mountain, and the number of upper plane cultivators in Dali keeps increasing. If the imperial advisor can provide help to the army, and we build a Saint Plain iron troop together, it must be invincible, King Tiandao said in a solemn voice. Therefore, I earnestly request Your Majesty to allow the imperial advisor to enter the army and build an iron troop for the prosperity of Dali dynasty. The imperial advisor has put much effort and work in teaching cultivators for years in Emperor Li's city. I often send people to learn matrix methods from the imperial advisor and use the knowledge to train the army. Brother King, you are too straightforward. You want the imperial advisor to join the army, said Emperor Li, laughing. King Tiandao said, Your Majesty, these years, the imperial advisor has put much effort into his job, and his contribution to the dynasty has been significant. However, nowadays, everything in the imperial city runs smoothly, and the status of Dali Academy is unshakable. I heard that now the imperial advisor seldom takes up matters of Dali Academy, since the third prince has made a breakthrough in the unblemished Saint Plain. I suggest the third princess take charge of Dali Academy for the imperial advisor and handle issues in the city. Prince Regent and King White can also maintain the city's stability. The imperial advisor and his disciples all have military ability and wisdom. If they can enter the army and cooperate with me, we can build an unparalleled troop, continued King Tiandao. Suddenly everyone's expression turned serious. All the top figures of the Dali imperial city gathered in front of the staircase, but no one let out a sound. King Tiandao wanted to enlist the imperial advisor and his disciples in the army, and let the third prince be in charge of Dali National Academy. Didn't it mean asking imperial advisor to hand over the enterprise he had been devoting many years to? However, everything in Dali dynasty was supposed to belong to the royal clan. How could the imperial advisor say no if the third prince came to take charge? I can get your point, brother. If the imperial advisor and King Tiandao cooperate, indeed, an unassailable army can be established on the land of Dali, said Emperor Li, smiling. He turned to ask the imperial advisor, "What do you think of King Tiandao's opinion?" The imperial advisor made a fist salute and said, "Nowadays, Dali National Academy is indeed running in good condition, and I am not engaged with the job. Yin Yuan is in charge of running it. If your majesty would like to appoint the prince and others to the board of the academy, I can relax more and will be delighted to do so. As for entering the army, I am studying the new matrix method, and if there is an outcome, I will send it to the palace and then to the army," the imperial advisor continued. "But directing the army is not my field. I am afraid I will disagree with King Tiandao if we work together. Is there anything in the world the imperial advisor is not good at?" King Tiandao said after listening to the imperial advisor. "And imperial advisor, you don't need to worry about disagreement. As long as you are willing to join the army and build it well with me, I don't mind serving as the imperial advisor's assistant. Your Highness is so dedicated to strengthen the army. Are you preparing for the war?" the imperial advisor questioned him. "Dali dynasty is powerful enough to start a war. Why can't we do it?" replied King Tiandao. "A war between realms will cost too much, and once it explodes, the number of casualties will be uncontrollable even if the scale is not large. Dali is far from ready for it," said the imperial advisor. "Exactly. That is why we need the imperial advisor's support," said King Tiandao. Emperor Li didn't speak, so the argument was only between the imperial advisor and King Tiandao. Prince Regent just stood there quietly and didn't say a word. It was as if all that had happened was none of his business. "Please stop arguing, both of you," Emperor Li said, laughing. "Imperial advisor is right. Wars are costly. Once the war begins, the situation will be out of our control. This issue requires further thought and discussion. How about King Tiandao, an imperial advisor, talk after the meeting?" "Yes, Your Majesty," King Tiao, an imperial advisor, said, nodding and ending the quarrel. "Does anyone else have anything to report?" Emperor Li asked and turned to others. Some reported some unimportant issues. However, Yi Futian was still slightly agitated. Did King Tiandao try to provoke a war? Was he aiming at Emperor Xia's realm? At the thought of this, he delivered the message to the condor and let him pass it on to Xia Qingyuan. But soon, the condor's message for help came to Yi Futian's mind, which made Yi Futian feel curious. After taking a look at what had happened on that side, he said to himself that this guy deserved it. Didn't he know it was suicidal to irritate Xia Qingyuan by the things that happened today in the court? One could imagine how Xia Qingyuan's mood was like when she found out Yi Futian almost became Emperor Li's son-in-law. He came to Emperor Li's realm for revenge, and now he would become one of them? Yi Futian perceived how violent the scene where Xia Qingyuan and the Cyan Argusianus beat the condor was, and paid a silent tribute for him in advance. This was what his loose lips deserved. Yi Futian could hear Black Wind Condor's dreadful shrinking even from the infinitely far distance. This time Xia Qingyuan, that woman, really had no mercy. In Dali Palace, after Emperor Li announced the end of the court meeting, the crowd dispersed. Li Yao took a look at Yi Futian and felt pity for him. If Yi Futian had agreed to become the son-in-law, his power in Dali would have definitely reached its apex. However, he declined the chance. He was as usual very special. Li Yao didn't come to talk to Yi Futian, but rather, he walked to King White and King Tiandao. Not long ago, he received a message, and now he needed King White and King Tiandao's backup. Otherwise, the manpower he was able to manage would be not enough. Emperor Li convened King Tiandao, Prince Regent, King White for a meeting, and the rest of the crowd gradually dispersed. Emperor Li convened King Tiandao, Prince Regent, King White for a meeting, and the rest of the crowd gradually dispersed. Li Yao walked to Yan Yuan and Yi Futian's side and said, laughing, "The seventh swordsman, just now if you had said yes, from now on you would have to call me brother-in-law." "I hope your highness didn't mind," said Yi Futian. Li Yao shook his head and said, "Of course not, since you are emotionally attached to master's daughter. My sister Li Shao is very unruly. If you had nodded, she would still cause a disturbance." The seventh swordsman was such a proud person, and the first time he met with Li Shao, the two had already had an intense confrontation. If Li Shao married Jin Qi, the scene must be quite horrifying. Li Yao guessed they could fight every day. Yi Futian didn't say much. Yan Yuan, who was standing aside, cut in. "It takes a while for His Majesty and the Imperial Advisor to discuss issues. The seventh swordsman, and I should return now, Your Highness." "I will see you out, elder brother," said Li Yao. "Please stay, Your Highness," said Yan Yuan respectfully. And then they returned. Li Yao watched Yi Futian leave, and had a thought in his mind. In the Battle of Empty Realm, Yi Futian of Emperor Xiao's realm was peerless, and no one on the battlefield dared to fight him. Today the seventh sword was also unrivaled in Emperor Li's realm. If both appeared on the battlefield, who would defeat the other? The message he received recently was just about Yi Futian. If Li Yao had known the two people that he was comparing were the same person, nobody could understand how he would feel. Of course, they looked like two utterly different people. Yi Futian was good at using halberds, and the seventh sword was good at using swords. Li Yao had made close contact with Yi Futian several times, and he felt their life forces were completely different. Li Yao was smart, but he did not think they were the same person. The thought had never even occurred to him. Anyway, who would suddenly think two completely different people were one for no reason? It was said that after Yi Futian and others left the imperial palace, Li Shao was furious in her palace, and claimed she would kill the seventh swordsman, who had embarrassed her so much. How could he reject the emperor's betrothal in public? Did he think she didn't deserve him? She heard that the imperial advisor's daughter had a severe illness, could not see, and had to sleep all the time. And his heart belonged to her. Was a princess not better than a half-dead patient? Wasn't it an embarrassment? Even though the patient was the imperial advisor's daughter, it was an open secret. Nobody dared to mention it during the court meeting, but they all knew. The people in Princess's residence lived their lives in apprehension, but most people in the palace enjoyed it as a farce. After Li Shao was mollified, she would soon forget about it, but if the seventh swordsman had promised to marry her, she probably would still make a fuss. Yi Futian wasn't even aware of all this. He didn't care what Li Shao thought. In Emperor Xiao's realm, Black Wind Condor was being beaten like hell, while in the villa where the cottage was located, on the back side of the mountain, the Sword Saint stood on the edge of a cliff in silence, his black clothes blowing in the wind. Behind him, a person came and asked, "What are you thinking about, brother?" The person was the cottage villa third disciple Gu Donglu. "It has been 19 years, Sword Saint said abruptly. However, Gu Donglu understood what he meant. He walked to Sword Saint's side and nodded. "Yes, 19 years. In year 10004 of the Divine Prefecture calendar, the peerless Princess Donghuang came to the Book Mountain of Eastern Barren Territory and took away Sir Du of the cottage villa. Today was year 10023 of the Divine Prefecture calendar. It had been 19 years. Others might not understand what Sword Saint meant, but Gu Donglu understood it. Too many things had happened over these 19 years. They had reached the height they'd never dreamt of before. They had experienced numerous trials. So many times, they had been on the edge of death, until they came to be who they were today. Even so, it seemed they still had a long way to go. The Sword Saint looked up at the sky dome and asked, Donglu, how high do you think the sky is? When people in the lower worlds looked up, what they saw was the sky. When people of the upper worlds looked up, the sky was still there. How high was the sky? Infinitely high, said Gu Donglu. How far can we go? Asked Sword Saint again. Infinitely far as our hearts, said Gu Donglu. Sword Saint nodded, smiling. The sky was infinitely high, as the heart says the paths. Once upon a time, people called him a genius, and said his state of mind was exceptional, that he could witness history. He didn't care if he could witness history or not. What he cared about was nothing, but when he could see Master, and achieve his wish with him. However, all seemed too far away. The more he thought, the more intangible everything seemed. Donglu, I am going to enter the Saint Plane, said Sword Saint. Gu Donglu paused a second and grinned, saying, That's great. The brother had finally made a breakthrough on that level. Since he said he would enter the Saint Plane, he would make it. Gu Donglu had no doubt whether or not the brother was a saint. Sword Saint laughed. He reached out one hand. All of a sudden, demonic might pervaded the space, and in the roaring waves of demonic might, a demon sword gradually formed. All the might converged in his body, which made him ball to the sky and earth. Even though it is infinitely far, I will chase after it. Sword Saint took a stride forward, and lifted the demon sword into the air. Stronger demonic might kept rolling, growling, and merging into the sword. The demon sword greedily swallowed the terrifying radiance. An aura of force surrounded the whole villa. People in the villa looked up in the sky. Yaya, Lapis Saint, and the village chief all looked at Sword Saint, who was soaring up in the mid-air, as if he was attempting to touch the bound of the sky. Brother! Zhuge Mingyue, Luo Fan, Yi Shaoshi and Beitang Xinger also caught sight of Sword Saint, and looked toward the sky. As Sword Saint rose higher, the demonic might also grew stronger. The light of catastrophe flickered above the upper sky. The storm and clouds turned dark, as if the end of the world would come. The sky transformed. His catastrophe. People in the villa were in shock. Brother is entering his Saint Plane catastrophe. Zhuge Mingyue tucked her hair behind her ears using one slender hand. Her eyes were crystal clear and gorgeous when she looked toward the empty sky. A saint, a cottage villa disciple, would become a figure of the Saint Plane. From now on, the older brother would become a Sword Saint in the true sense of the word. If Master had been able to see the day to come, he must have been very happy. Besides the older brother, Donglu, and Yi Futian were also in the last stage of Sage Plane, and one day, they would experience this too. Especially Yi Futian. He had caught up with everyone in cultivation. Maybe he would meet the Master's expectation one day. Today is such a good day, sister. Beitang Xinger walked to Zhuge Mingyue and said, On the first day of year 10023, according to Divine Prefecture calendar, the older brother entered Saint Plane. Yi Futian would also be happy for his older brother if he had been here. Black clouds loomed in the upper sky, as if the demon catastrophe was about to come. Everyone's catastrophe differed depending on their cultivation styles. The intensity of Sword Saint's catastrophe was much higher than the catastrophe of Dozhan. The force seemed to be able to crush Sword Saint. But no cottage disciples doubted whether or not Sword Saint could pass this catastrophe. Just as what Master had said during the cottage cultivation. Although the older brother's talent was ordinary among all brothers and sisters, he continued to make steady progress. Since he was experiencing the Saint Plane catastrophe, he had completed all the required conditions. It was an automatic outcome. Even though the Saint Plane catastrophe might be a tough one, all disciples believed the older brother would overcome it. The Sword Saint continued soaring up in the sky, as if he was attempting to run into the catastrophe of law. The sword was held tight in his hand. The boundless reflection of catastrophe light dripped down from the sky. Followed by an appalling thunder, the catastrophe befell him. Sword Saint raised his sword and heaved a heavy strike toward the catastrophe. The catastrophe was chopped up. Even the sky dome seemed to be torn apart. The scene was like a thump on everyone's heart. Soon the catastrophe converged again. Sword Saint put down his hand, and the sword faded away. The light of catastrophe fell upon him and washed across his torso. The catastrophe of the law was dangerous, but it was a necessary path to becoming a saint. One could only become a saint by accepting the purification of the law. That strike was not aimed at destroying the catastrophe. It was a manifestation of Sword Saint's fearless heart. Even though heaven was infinitely high, the path was infinitely far. He must rise up in person and see them with his own eyes. Under the dome of the boundless catastrophe, Sword Saint stood straight up in the air like a god. Even people far from the villa looked up and watched toward the direction, full of awe. In the imperial advisor's residence, Emperor Li's realm, at dusk Futian heard from the condor that the older brother had entered the Saint Plane. He woke up from the status of cultivation, and a grin spread across his face. He stood up on his feet, eyes fixed on the sky. Finally, a cottage disciple set foot on the saint path. The only pity was that Futian was not in the cottage to witness this historical moment. Now the older brother had entered the Saint Plane. One day Futian would too. So would the third brother. They would all reach a higher place. "What makes you so happy?" someone said in a soft voice. Futian turned around and saw Fei Shui, who was facing him. She said, "I can sense how excited you are from a far distance." "A happy thing, of course," Futian said, laughing. "Really? I heard in today's court meeting His Majesty wanted to betroth Princess to you. If you were happy about this, you shouldn't have rejected it," Fei Shui said with a smile. "And when did you fall in love with me?" Futian was very embarrassed. Fei Shui smiled carelessly. She was able to sense emotions, so she knew Futian was never in love with her. Otherwise, he could not hide it in front of her. "Why did you decline the emperor's betrothal? Don't tell me you really have someone you love?" Fei Shui said, grinning. She suddenly wanted to know about Futian's thoughts. It must be interesting. Futian heard Fei Shui's questions, and it felt like an icy needle was pricking his heart. Even after so many years had passed, he was still heartbroken whenever it came to his mind. Fei Shui's smile vanished. She immediately realized her curiosity was not appropriate. She lowered her head and softly said, "I'm sorry." She knew she asked a bad question. "Never mind, it's not about you," Futian said. He knew Fei Shui didn't mean to. "I should go now. Please forget it and continue thinking about that happy things," Fei Shui said quietly, and turned and left, worrying she would affect Futian's mood. Seeing her leave, Futian shook his head with a bitter smile. How could he easily forget it since it had already come into his mind? But the news that Sword Saint had entered the Saint Plane still made him happy from the bottom of his heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.